Segment 3, Gold and Black Live. We got the A team back together. Brian Newbert, Tom Dienhart joined me. I want to thank our sponsors, Triple X and State Farm agent Trent Johnson. Of course, appreciate the comments from Tim Newton and Kyle Orton as well. Orton will be inducted tonight in the Indiana Football Hall of Fame, which will be a nice event for him in the National Football Foundation. So, all right, Tom, I'll start with you. The Purdue and Indiana State tomorrow at 4 p.m. One of those games where you really not a whole lot to be gained, but maybe in some ways Purdue needs to get some rhythm going. You hope that can happen, but how do you see the game against the Sycamores?
Yeah, I think, confidence, mojo, however you want to put it, Alan. I think Purdue's got those type of things to gain. Disappointing loss last Thursday. I think everybody realizes, the team included, that they probably let one get away, right? It was right there for the taking. They did not finish. We've analyzed that all to death and discussed that ad nauseum. So the team and everybody, I guess we're moving on at this point. You got to, right? These games start ticking off real fast, and Indiana State's next. And like you said, Alan, it's an overmatched opponent from the FCS ranks, an opponent Purdue should take care of handily as a 35-point favorite. So again, if you're the Boilermakers, ideally, you put your foot on their neck quick. You have this game in command early in the second half, and hopefully you coast across the finish line. A lot of guys get to play in what's a fairly easy victory, fellas, because as you know, looming next is that trip to Syracuse, and that looks appreciably more difficult now, given the way the Orange opened the year against Louisville, 31-7.
Yeah, no question about that. Brian, looking at this from a broad stroke standpoint, we've watched some FCS games over the years. Purdue is 12-0 against the FCS. The only one that really was close, really close, was dicey, was the Ricardo Allen pick against Indiana State in 2013, or Purdue might have gone winless that year. But how do you perceive this game and look at what might be gained for Purdue? Any other great insight into what we might see on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Purdue ought to win this game. They ought to win this game comfortably, but a lot of teams said that last week, and Virginia Tech loses to, was it Old Dominion?
Yep.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of scares. Iowa doesn't score a touchdown against North Dakota State, things like that. I don't know if Purdue's in a place yet to take anything for granted. These Indiana State games, historically, and history has nothing to do with anything because every team is different. But you remember Torrey Williams gets hurt many, many years ago against Indiana State when that game, he probably shouldn't have been on the field in the second half. It was a closer game than it needed to be. The Ricardo Allen game you mentioned before, I was remembering it as a blocked field goal. Maybe it was an interception. The blocked field goal might have been somebody else. These games can make you sweat sometimes, and they can really make you sweat if you sit there and think you're just going to go through the motions and beat these guys. I think Purdue is far from a finished product, as the Penn State game showed you, but also there's some real, promise there, as the Penn State game also showed you. You just want to get through this one. You just want to improve a little bit. You just want to get some guys experience that you're going to need the rest of the season, kind of things like that. But you also don't want to go out there and just take it for granted and, end up in a close game late in the third quarter or something like that, allowing crazy things to happen.
Yeah, no question. Jeff Brom talked about he thought his team improved during the week, and maybe hinted in Thursday night's comments about the hangover effect of a disappointing loss. And maybe I don't know what to read into that. I don't know what you read into it, or in terms of hearing the coach talk Thursday. But how do you view that? Just the fact that the Penn State loss was disappointed. Maybe you have a couple extra days to get yourself righted. You have an opponent that you should beat by 4 or 5 touchdowns at least. But just the mojo that you mentioned earlier about this team moving forward.
Yeah, they got right to correcting some of those deficiencies that we all saw on Thursday night that weekend, of course, one of those being tackling. And it sounds like it was a very inspired week of practice. I think there were 14 or 15 missed tackles, if you look at Pro Football Focus, at least by their tally. Of course, we all know the 4 or 5 that really stand out, right? And they're there for everybody to see in the open field. And we all know the team's got to get that stuff obviously ironed out. So that was obviously a big area of focus. Talking about Aiden O'Connell too, I asked Coach Brom about what's he looking for from Aiden on Saturday. And, I don't think Aiden was on the money, so to speak. Jeff Brom said that maybe at sometimes he threw the ball, got rid of it too quickly, not giving his guys enough time to break from coverage to get open. Sometimes it's throwing off his back foot. The statistics show, guys, he was just a 50% passer as well, 30 for 60. We all know what that completion percentage was last year, upwards of 70 or 72%. He did some good things, obviously, didn't have any interceptions. He was well protected. So there are some positives as well. It wasn't all negative, obviously, from Thursday night. But as a staff, Brian's written about this and talked about this too. The one benefit of playing a team like Penn State right on the jump is you get your fallacies, your deficiencies exposed right away. You get stripped down, you get a chance to look at what you really need to improve at. So there's a lot of benefit to that. Probably more than playing, a FAMU or just some other FCS program right out of the gate and winning 60-0. So nobody likes to lose. You like to learn lessons and win, but Purdue learned lessons and lost. But there's still plenty of track in front of them. And obviously all their goals are still there too. It's just a matter of, we'll see how quickly they've addressed their issues beginning Saturday, but more importantly, even moving forward here when they jump back into it against Power 5 teams. They play Syracuse on September 17th.
Brian, Kyle Orton said in segment 1, talked about the 2003 game, which you remember against Bowling Green. Purdue started that season with a loss. Now, I'm not comparing, it's apples and oranges, I get that, but he talked openly about the famed practice they had the next day. And Joe Tiller, they had a 3-hour scrimmage. He said it was the only time that Kyle had been hit in practice as a quarterback. Obviously, punishment it's the world's changed. I get it. We're 19 years later, but getting players' attention and from a broad stroke perspective, again, a loss can do that to some extent, but maybe a little bit harder these days in today's different environment. What do you say about that, if anything? Or am I just rambling?
Yeah, well, probably, but yeah. I remember Tiller doing the whole Sunday Bloody Sunday thing.
Yeah.
With the full contact scrimmage on Sunday. And then I think Purdue went to Wake Forest next week.
And won.
And that was 16-13. So it's not like Purdue just completely came out. And a footnote to that was current Purdue running backs coach Chris Barclay under that pile of Boilermakers on that fourth down coverage blitz there at the end. That it was Schweigert and Kudavitis and pretty much a veritable cast of thousands in Wake Forest's backfield. But yeah, Tiller was kind of like that, where and I think times were different too then. I don't know if any coach these days could, get away with that. Things have changed quite a bit in a very short period of time. But yeah, I mean, I don't think though that, as we've talked about with the Penn State game, it was very obvious what Purdue has to get better at. And if the players need that brought to their attention, as opposed to it being plainly obvious to them, there's probably a fundamental disconnect there. It's not the number of missed tackles that mattered against Penn State. Not every missed tackle is the same. When somebody misses a tackle that turns a 1-yard gain into a 3-yard gain, that's one thing. When you play bumper cars in the secondary and try to take somebody down with your shoulder, he bounces right off you and then scores a 60-yard touchdown or whatever it is. That's problematic. And that was one of the things that, was probably most unsettling about Penn State. Probably the thing that was most unsettling about Penn State was the fundamentals and just the basic stuff in terms of the penalties, the missed tackles, the TJ Sheffield not taking care of the ball on that end around. That probably took points off the board for Purdue and then consequently put points on the board for Penn State. Things like that. I mean, things happen in week 1 that have to get cleaned up, but I just thought Purdue just had some things that, shouldn't happen in any game, let alone a big game like this one. That, the way the Penn State game was framed was, you like games like this because it makes you focus all off season. things like that. You have a big game to look forward to right off the bat. Well, there were things in that game that did not speak to focus, did not speak to, everyone having their eyes on the ball, so to speak. And that's the sort of thing that there's got to be a moment of reflection here for these guys. And it shouldn't have to be brought to their attention necessarily by their coaches that you can't tackle the way you tackled against Penn State. You can't, not protect the football when that's a basic thing people are taught when they're very young, stuff like that, and expect to have the sort of season you want to have here. Ultimately, at some point in time, it's also up to the players, and they have to have some personal pride about it and, get things righted without having to be, thrown to the wolves in practice the next day.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that's a storyline. Though, admittedly, Wake Forest was actually ranked when Purdue beat them.
They were good. Yeah, that wasn't a bad Wake Forest team. It was just
Jim Grove, I think.
It was still a 16-13 game.
Yes, it was a tough. Yeah, I think that's right. I think it was around that score, or 16-10 or something like that. But Purdue had to make a big tackle in the last minute or two to get the job done. All right, Tom, other things that you're going to watch for on Saturday, if you're going to have a guy that, and I know in our predictions on the site here this afternoon, you'll have your pick to click, but who are you most interested in seeing? Is it the backup quarterback? What do you see for the game on Saturday against Indiana State?
So you think a backup quarterback is going to play? It's going to be a blowout, huh?
I think if you're Purdue, you'd like to get somebody some reps, wouldn't you?
I think we all. But yeah, I guess Tyrone Tracy, right?
Yeah.
I think some people said he was locked up by Joey Porter Jr. all game long. I'm not sure if that's true or not. But long story short, bottom line, he only played about 24 snaps, only had 2 touches. We've talked about this a lot. So Tyrone Tracy, I think I'll be interested to see his performance Saturday, if they can get him more involved, because I do think, guys, he's going to have to be one of the hubs of this offense if they want to be as good as they think. At least I believe so. Maybe I'm wrong. So he's one guy for sure. I think defensively, just continuing to watch the pass rush. I think they got some good pressure, or better pressure, as the game went along. We saw the sack in the second half by Scotty Humpich. So I think I'm interested to see there the pass rush. There may be more guys, or a few guys, who really step up and they look like they're going to be your top pass rushers. I think it's going to be Scotty Humpich and Kydron Jenkins, but maybe more shall be revealed as we move forward. Maybe Nick Carraway continues to play a bigger role. So those would be a couple guys, areas I'm going to be focusing on Saturday come kickoff at 4.
Yeah, Humpich is a guy that's interesting, and that I think you've nailed both of mine from my predictions there. But guys, I'm going to be watching. Brian, I'll let you talk about that in terms of who you'll be watching, but also a visitor weekend for men's basketball too. I want to wrap up the show with a quick note about that too. So fire away.
Yeah, well, the football part of it, I think coming into this year, Purdue's most established and best offensive skill position player is Payne Durham. I think you want to see him, become a little bit more of that foundational player offensively.
Yeah, I agree.
He had the one big play there down in scoring territory, but a couple other opportunities where either he or O'Connell just didn't click with one another. That's kind of the thing about the passing game. You look at O'Connell being around 50% completion rate. He hasn't thrown to these guys a lot. And I think that now, obviously, Payne Durham is an exception. He's got a lot of experience, but a lot of these other guys that are now at the forefront at wide receiver for Purdue are guys that, haven't been in that position before. So I kind of wonder, some of the plays where they were just this close to being, something much bigger. You sort of wonder if maybe a little more chemistry between the quarterback and the receivers, maybe that makes a difference. Maybe in week 6, those things are very different than they'd be in week 1, stuff like that. But I think the one known guy you have, absolutely known guy you have, is Payne Durham. And I think that needs to show up again the rest of the season. Maybe not necessarily against Indiana State, but the rest of the season anyway. To the basketball part of it, yes, Purdue has Travis Perry coming in for an official visit this weekend. He's one of their point guard targets. it is very early for these guys. These are junior year official visits. So for a lot of these guys, these will be the first or second of as many as 10 official visits they'll take over the next 2 years. So it's not as big of a deal as it would be if these guys were seniors who were moving toward decisions. But that being said, Purdue has done a really good job with junior year official visits over the years, and had some early success getting guys committed early, and that's allowed them to work ahead on classes. And I think that's had a lot to do with their success in recruiting. You look at Purdue having Jack Benner and Cannon Catchings committed right now for 2024. They're way ahead of the game, in part because Miles Colvin committed really early. Less importantly, Draven Gibbs Lawhorn committed early. That obviously dissolved. So Purdue was able to work ahead. Purdue had early commitments for them too that allowed them to work ahead. I think that's just a huge advantage Purdue's been able to give itself here. So Travis Perry comes in this weekend. Important visit for them. Point guard's an absolute must. Jakari Harris visited last weekend. He's another guard target. Raleigh Burgess is visiting as well. He's one of Purdue's front court targets. I'm not sure I'd call him a center. He's kind of like a 4-5, sort of like a Caleb First sort of player, but he'd fit their front court need too. But I don't think Purdue's in any hurry here either to fill up in 2024, because you got 2 commitments. You don't know how many scholarships you're going to have. That COVID year is still hanging out there for all your juniors. How many of them will take advantage? I have no idea, but that's the reality of recruiting nowadays, is you have no idea how many scholarships you have. You know, for all we know, some too good to be true transfer might show up in the spring and say, hey, I have 3 years of eligibility. I want to come to Purdue now. And then all of a sudden your 2024 recruiting plan, changes. So I don't think Purdue's in any hurry here to fill all 4 of its scholarships on paper in 2024. But they are off to a really good start with Jack Benner and Cannon Catchings. And I'm just rambling at this point, so I will kind of cut it off there.
Yeah, fair enough. But we want to tease that a little bit. Obviously, we'll be covering that well. All right, guys. Thanks so much for your time and insight. We will put this show to a close. I want to thank Kyle Orton and Tim Newton also for being guests. We will have a show. Tom will be getting on the road. He'll have flawless travel to Syracuse, guaranteed next week. No, but we'll have our show leading into that game as well. Special guest to be determined, but we'll look forward to that. So have a great week, everybody, and weekend. And we want to thank Triple X on the hill, but on the level of Purdue tradition since 1929, and State Farm agent who wasn't around, Trent Johnson, who wasn't around in 1929, but he's been a friend of Golden Blacks for a long time. We appreciate them. And of course, Gordon Jackson and the group at WLFI for all that they've done. Mary Truax as well, all their help for this show. So have a great week, everybody. We'll see you next week on Golden Black Live.